Hello, I'm Geetha Gurumurthy. This is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing, bringing you up to date with all you need to know on day 102 of the US-Israel war with Iran. Well, let's start with some of today's key developments. President Donald Trump says Iran shot down a US Apache helicopter that was patrolling the Strait of Hormuz overnight, adding that the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. Israel has carried out strikes across southern Lebanon, despite a warning from Iran not to continue attacks in the country. President Trump has told the BBC that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu didn't defy his orders to hold off from attacking Iran. We consider what are the factors driving Mr. Netanyahu as he prosecutes his wars against Iran and against Hezbollah. Disappointment and frustration for Iran's football supporters while the players arrive to prepare for their matches. The country's entire allocation of fan tickets has been revoked. Well, President Trump has said Iran shot down a US Apache helicopter patrolling the Strait of Hormuz and the US needs to respond to the attack. In a post on his Truth Social platform, he said the two pilots had been rescued and were safe and uninjured. He didn't say what form the US response would take. On Monday, Mr. Trump demanded that Israel and Iran stop firing at each other and return to a ceasefire after renewed clashes. More details here from our North America editor, Sarah Smith.
Donald Trump published this post on his own social media channel, Truth Social, and in it he said there were two pilots involved. Both are safe and uninjured. Nevertheless, the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. So that's a clear warning to Iran. Now, I think in these circumstances, any US president would probably think that they had to respond. But we know that Donald Trump is particularly sensitive to any situation which he thinks makes him look beaten or weakened in any way. I think, though, there is another reason why he will take this opportunity. It's very clear that the US doesn't want to return to full-scale conflict with Iran. But Donald Trump has to keep that possibility on the table whilst he's continuing to negotiate a peace deal. So if he looks so risk-averse that Iran thinks there's no chance of him attacking, he would think that would undermine his negotiating position. So in some ways, he might see this as a useful opportunity to land a blow, to show that the US is not frightened of taking action. But by telegraphing it in advance, by saying that there will be attack and directly in response to the downing of the helicopter, he's obviously trying to keep this under control and sort of stop it escalating and spiralling out of control in some kind of tit-for-tat exchange of missiles. But we wait to see what happens.
Sarah Smith there with me is our diplomatic correspondent James Landale. James, what could this mean potentially for this very tentative pause that we've seen?
Well, obviously, the risk is that this escalates once again. I think that, as Sarah was saying, the Americans will want to respond, but in a way that's calibrated, that on the one hand demonstrates deterrence and strength and not a lack of weakness, but equally doesn't respond so forcefully that it actually leads to the situation becoming further out of control. So I imagine that American military will be now giving the president options and alternatives, and say that you could do X, Y, and Z, and then trying to work out what the right response will be from their point of view. The problem is that as we've seen in recent days, the Americans are not running this show at the moment. The momentum, the drive, the decision-making and the agency is largely in the hands of decision-makers in Tehran and in Israel. And I think the risk, therefore, is whether or not the Americans actually calibrate this correctly or not, and risk, as Sarah said, another tit-for-tat exchange of fire.
James, thanks very much indeed. We'll be back with you in a few moments, but we just want to bring in the other developments that we've seen today, because it was an intervention by President Trump that ended on Monday waves of airstrikes between Israel and Iran. Donald Trump's intervention led to an agreement to halt fire between Jerusalem and Tehran. Israel's focus shifted back to Lebanon, effectively Israel's second front in the war. What we've been seeing has been a resumption of strikes in southern Lebanon, in particular airstrikes in the city of Tyre. The Lebanese Health Ministry says at least 8 people have been killed and rescuers have been searching through the rubble of the strike for survivors. These are some of the latest pictures showing the aftermath of those strikes on the coastal city. But it comes only hours after the Israeli military had urged residents to leave the area ahead of possible attacks. The evacuation order also included the Christian Quarter for the first time. Tyre is one of the oldest cities on the Mediterranean coast and one of the south's largest. Israel has heavily bombarded the city since Hezbollah drew Lebanon into the Middle East war on March the 2nd. For Israel, its military campaigning in Lebanon is all about Hezbollah, as our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bachega, who's in Beirut, explains.
Israel says its war against Hezbollah is going to continue, opposing those efforts by Iran to link what is happening here to the ceasefire there. And Israeli officials say the goal in Lebanon is to create what they describe as a security zone along the border to protect Israeli communities from Hezbollah's rockets and drones. And I think they see this as an opportunity to degrade Hezbollah, destroy Hezbollah's military capabilities, and perhaps even pave the way for a possible disarmament. Although this is extremely difficult, this is a complicated issue. Armed resistance is in Hezbollah's DNA. And here in Lebanon, Hezbollah is more than a militia. It is also a political party with representation in the parliament, in the government. It is also a social movement running services like schools and hospitals. So it is essential in many people's lives. Now, the group has been weakened in these wars with Israel, but it still enjoys significant support, especially among Shia Muslims. But at the same time, it is increasingly isolated. Many Lebanese blame Hezbollah for dragging the country into these unnecessary wars with Israel and want the group to be disarmed, which is something that so far Hezbollah has rejected. And the government here has been very clear that this can only happen through a negotiated process, that this will not happen through force, and that this is going to take time. And obviously, Lebanon is a country where a lot of people are exhausted by these wars. They want this conflict to end. And in Israel, there is public support for the war to continue, although a lot of people are questioning what else can be achieved in degrading Hezbollah, weakening Hezbollah without a clear political strategy. And what is happening here has become an obstacle in those negotiations for a deal between President Trump and Iran.
Hugo Bachega there in Beirut. Well, these developments in Lebanon follow Monday's pause in 24 hours of direct hostilities between Israel and Iran, the first exchange of fire between the two countries since a truce was agreed in April. Well, President Trump has insisted that Israel's Prime Minister did not defy his order to hold off from striking Iran on Monday. In a phone call with our North America editor, Sarah Smith, Mr. Trump said missiles were already on their way when he told Benjamin Netanyahu not to respond to Tehran's attacks. The veteran Israeli journalist Gideon Levy is a columnist for Haaretz, and he says it's evident where the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu currently stands.
I think it's quite clear that Netanyahu of today is not in a position to say no to Donald Trump on almost anything. Israel is more depending on the United States than ever before, becoming a pariah state and losing most of the sympathy around the world. The Americans are the only ally for Israel, and Israel cannot conduct a war against Iran without the support of the United States.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent Seb Usher in Jerusalem. And Seb, clearly the pressure that President Trump can bring on Benjamin Netanyahu is significant, but they're not the only drivers at play for the Prime Minister. I mean, is it clear what the Israeli strategy is?
I think he's in a bit of a bind, Mr. Netanyahu, at the moment. As we were just hearing there, from one side he has the very powerful US influence and that relationship with the US, which is what we've just been hearing, that it's not just what the US gives in terms of arms, in terms of military aid to Israel. It's basically the legitimacy that it gives to Israel as almost a special case in the world. And if that begins to fade, then, as President Trump is reported to have said to Mr. Netanyahu, it could be left alone. So Mr. Netanyahu has to bear that very strongly in mind, I think. Whatever his relationship is with President Trump, it goes up and down. It's that basic relationship between Israel, the country, and the US, which is important. But here, domestically, it's different. Here, the pressure is actually to keep on with the campaign against Iran, to keep on with the offensive against Hezbollah, to fulfill the promises that Mr. Netanyahu made to the people. But this time, after all the times that have happened before, there will be a genuine elimination of the threat from both, which are still seen here, I think, by the majority of people as existential.
So it is the case you're saying that Netanyahu still has the broad support of the mass of Israeli society, or are there divides?
I think over the foreign policy, over these two absolutely key issues at the moment, the war in Lebanon and the war against Iran, yes, because of that sense that people have that this is an existential threat. I mean, we've all been to bombed out buildings during the various exchanges of fire that there have been here, and it said, you know, this is a war that we're fighting on the front line for the world, not just for ourselves. So that stays. That obviously could change if the attritional war in Hezbollah against Hezbollah continues. Almost daily there are Israeli soldiers who are killed, but we saw that took almost 2 decades for a change to happen really within Israeli society over that. The issues that are divisive with Mr. are more domestic. You'll remember the hundreds of thousands of people who would come out every weekend, every Saturday, to the streets here, to the other big cities, in protest against his plans to change the judiciary here, to give more power to the Prime Minister, to take that independence away from the judiciary. That's still latent, and I think we will see that play out over this election period. An election has to be held before the end of October. Those domestic issues will count, but on the foreign issues at the moment, as things stand, I think where Mr. Netanyahu would be seen as weak and where his political opponents are trying to gain advantage is over not being hard enough, not achieving enough in terms of the military offensive, rather than pulling back and allowing ceasefires to take place.
Sebastian Usher, thanks very much. Let's wrap up this programme by examining how far the conflict in Lebanon has become an obstacle in the negotiations for a deal between President Trump and Iran. Can Hezbollah be separated from a nuclear deal, or oil and the Strait of Hormuz? Or does the future oil stability rest on what we've been seeing in the historic city of Tyre and this latest development, the shooting down of a US military helicopter? Could that change everything yet again? Well, with me on set is BBC Persian's correspondent Gia Gol and our diplomatic correspondent James Landale. Gia, can I just ask you just to give us your sense of a response as to this latest line that we've had of President Trump saying they're going to have to respond? Is there any reporting of this in the Iranian media that you've seen?
Well, the interesting thing was when we heard this helicopter shut down, we didn't hear anything from Iranian side. Normally, they talk about it, but they just, when President Trump announced it, Iranian news agency quoted him that the helicopter has been shut down. But it seems to me it's a limited military operation on both sides in the past few weeks. I was just talking to James before I come on the set. I said, somebody wrote on Twitter, he said, drones and missiles and fighter jets comes and go. What remain is ceasefire at this point of time.
Yeah, and James, I mean, in terms of trying to understand all the different moving parts here, Lebanon is still really critical, isn't it? Because whether Iran is responding with this helicopter attack to the continued action from Netanyahu in southern Lebanon, you know, that's obviously potentially there. And just who has control overall? Does anybody have control overall?
No, I think no one's got full control over this because there are so many moving parts. I think what this Apache incident shows is it's yet another hurdle to getting a deal. If you think about it, in recent weeks, but some sides have spoken about the proximity of a deal, how close it is. This is just a framework deal. We're talking about a few pages, simply saying, OK, let's continue the ceasefire. Let's open the Strait of Hormuz. Let's start the process of lifting these relative blockades, and an agreement on what may or may not come in the future. Talks about, you know, nuclear issues, sanctions lifting, all of that. What's happened in recent days is two things have got in the way. One is the whole situation in Lebanon. Iran has insisted that becomes part of the equation. The Americans didn't want that, the Israelis didn't want that, but it is now clearly part of the equation simply because of the willingness of the Iranians to keep that issue on the table, and they're putting military force behind their willingness to do it. And then secondly, we've got this incident with the Apache, which, if you think about it, it's sort of surprising it hasn't happened earlier, given the scale and size of US military forces in the region, that something like this hasn't happened before. But it shows that, you know, it's another hurdle for Donald Trump to try and get a deal, because he's got to make his response first, and he's got to try and quieten things down, if possible, in Lebanon before potentially those mediated talks with the Pakistanis and the Iranians and Americans could continue. So it gets harder.
And Gia, at the same time that we've got the diplomacy, we understand some talks, both sides, Iran and the US and Israel, all sides have to work out exactly how to calibrate the next steps, how the US responds and then how potentially Tehran responds.
Well, I think the diplomatic channel is open. I came in, the Iranian ambassador to UN said they have been in talk with the US. They are in the process of finalizing the agreement. It has not finalized. It is one hand. On the other hand, we have witnessed a limited military operation by Iran, whether attacking Israel or attacking some of the countries in the region like Kuwait or United Arab Emirates, or just recently attacking the US military. I think Iranian trying to project power, and they feel that at this point of time, they might use this strength to draw a new red line and tell them, actually demand more. This is a mentality among some of the Iranian leadership that they should ask for more. They are in a higher position and they can impose their own demand on the US.
Gia Gold, James Landell, thank you both very much indeed. Whether you're watching us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or television, thank you for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran war today.